Thank you. And I'm going to be kind of splitting into two different talks today. My main talk is going to be about the mausoleum, which I actually love, but then I'm going to do a little bit at the end about headstones in Pine Grove Cemetery in case you are going to join us for the tour, so you can kind of keep your eye out for some things to look at. So obviously, thanks for coming. It's a great crowd. I love to talk about cemeteries and mausoleums and death. So this one is right up my alley. I absolutely love Pine Grove Cemetery, and I love the mausoleum. It is a beautiful building if you have not been there, and I like to share the history of it. And one of the things that I just want to get out of the way to start with, because this is a question people always ask me, and they usually assume wrong, the mausoleum does not belong to the cemetery. The mausoleum is a private venture of the Pine Grove Mausoleum Association. So it is not owned by the cemetery. It is totally separate. Before we talk about the history of the mausoleum in Pine Grove itself, I just want to talk a little bit about mausoleums in general. Family mausoleums were already pretty widely in use for many centuries in this country and in other countries, but they were really mostly for the wealthy. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the Willard Family Mausoleum, which is in Pine Grove, and it is literally right outside the front door of the Pine Grove Mausoleum. That's behind it. And then the red brick structure that you see on the right is George Washington's family tomb that they used until 1831 when they replaced it with something else. And while family mausoleums, which would have a family in them, were common in the United States, the concept of what's referred to as a community mausoleum really was not something that was happening here. And a community mausoleum may have dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of people in crypts that are inside. And this concept wasn't really developed here until 1907, when the first community mausoleum in the country opened. And it was in Ohio, and this is the gentleman who started it, standing outside the mausoleum. And his company was aptly named the National Mausoleum Company. So the driving force behind the community mausoleum concept was really changes in public hygiene attitudes. The late 1800s brought a lot of scientific discoveries and some new social attitudes about the importance of sanitation and hygiene, not only for you as a person, but for your community and food safety and all kinds of things. A lot of those concepts weren't entirely accurate. Mausoleum promoters in the early 1900s kind of glommed onto that and presented ideas that, among other things, ground burial was barbaric, filthy, germ-filled, and for the poor who had no other options. So here they're telling you, if you don't want people to think you're poor and can't afford it, you need to buy into the mausoleum concept. They also believed and kind of espoused the theories that germs and disease from the rotting corpse in the ground would kind of percolate up through the soil and hover above the cemetery, and anybody walking through it would be inhaling these germs. I think that's one of the questionable ones. But nonetheless, they presented that as a reason to try to be safe. And mausoleums were the preferred, civilized, clean, and healthy choice for families who cared about their family or their final resting place. So mausoleum promoters are now telling you, if you don't want people to think you're poor and dirty, you're going to want to buy a spot in our mausoleum. The International Mausoleum Company, that was first from Ohio and later from Chicago, was the first promoter of the community mausoleum concept. And this was the company that the Wausau investors in what became the Pine Grove Mausoleum, that's who they chose to partner with. And the basic concept that I've been able to piece together from information that I have found is that the investors paid the company to use their mausoleum patents, and those patents would have included things like ventilation to keep the odor of decaying bodies from hanging around in the building and being able to be vented out. And they also provided marketing support for you. Financial records that we have from the mausoleum Also show that there were regular small payments that were made to the Mausoleum Company every time a crypt was sold, which tells me that there was also some kind of licensing fee or commission that they had to pay the Mausoleum Company every time they sold one of the crypts. What's unclear to me is if the International Mausoleum Company provided the blueprints for our mausoleum, or if that was done by someone local. As the mausoleum was being built, there was a local architect who was associated with it as a project manager, but I don't think that necessarily means he's the one who designed it. So who were the people behind the mausoleum concept in Wausau? It was these two guys, Roman Deutsch and Hermann Fleeth. Roman on the left managed the Ritter and Deutsch funeral home that his father had founded, and then he later took over. Hermann Fleeth was a vice president at the American National Bank downtown, and he later joined his son in his insurance business. They were both very influential businessmen in town. They served on the boards of several banks and businesses. So Deutsch and Fleeth took steps to form the Pine Grove Mausoleum Association, and that association is what would own and operate the building. And the Wausau Cemetery Association sold them 20 lots near the back of Pine Grove Cemetery for $500, which amounts to about $13,000 today. And the Wausau Cemetery Association is the organization that owns and manages Pine Grove Cemetery now. Interestingly, the lots were not purchased for more than a year after they announced that they were going to launch this project. And what you see here is the original deed from the cemetery to the mausoleum conveying use of that land. Deutsch and Fleeth were now officially mausoleum promoters, which was apparently the official term, and their work was really just beginning. And I think it's very accurate to say that they had a huge job ahead of them trying to convince the people of Wausau that the community mausoleum concept, which none of them would ever have seen or known anything about, was something that they should be investing their money into. And to give you some context about where the mausoleum is in the cemetery, because a lot of people don't know. So this is Grand Avenue, and here is the entrance arch, the main entrance into the cemetery. The mausoleum is way in the back, circled there in red, so if you want to visit it, all you have to do is go in the main gate. You can go straight back and you'll see it on your right. So how did these two men promote this never-before-seen project? Likely it was with little more than an architect's rendering of what the building was going to look like and a marketing plan that they got from their partnership with the Mausoleum Company. So with that, they had to convince people, really sight unseen, that they should be investing and buying crypts in this mausoleum. In April of 1910, several Wausau newspapers carried stories announcing the mausoleum project was going to start. So the Wausau Sun headline was, "A Mausoleum for Wausau." And the Daily Herald said, "Burial will soon be made in crypts instead of graves fashioned in earth." And at the bottom, "Old custom to give way to the new, building to be imperishable." The Wausau Sun article also included some details about the proposed design. It is proposed that this tomb of tombs be built of reinforced concrete with granite or Bedford stone exterior, interior of polished marble with mosaic floors, and solid brass doors and window sills. There are but 400 or 500 of these institutions of this kind in the entire United States, and none in Wisconsin. The building will cost $30,000 and will be the only institution of its kind in the state. $30,000 in 1910 is about $250,000 or $825,000 today. So keep in mind this institution will be the only one of its kind in the state, because we're going to hear a little bit more about that later. And just a quick note about how I know all of this information that I know about the mausoleum. At one point, I really didn't know hardly anything about it. And in the 1990s, I was involved with restoring the entrance arch at the cemetery. And that was when I was introduced to the mausoleum, and I met some people who also were taking care of the mausoleum. And several years later, one of these people contacted me because she had all of the mausoleum records. She was elderly, and she wanted to make sure that they were preserved. And she felt comfortable giving them to me, and I eventually donated them to the Historical Society. So it's these 2 boxes that are right up here. So this is how I know a lot of what I know. That, and also newspapers.com is my research friend. So what was in the box, there's a folder for every crypt, or every block of crypts that were purchased. There's a lot of correspondence, information about fundraising efforts that they had, and also the original ledger that Roman Deutsch and Hermann Fleeth kept about all of their income and all of their expenses. So this is a little treasure here. And it's the book, right there. Looks a little more red on the screen, but that's the book. So the first 2 crypts, well, and let me just back up by saying the way that the promotion process worked, because the building was not yet built, and of course the promoters, Deutsch and Fleeth, didn't want to stick all of their own money into building this and not knowing if something's actually if it's going to be profitable. What they did was pre-sold crypts in the mausoleum and then used that money to, when they had enough, they used that to launch the project and start building. And this really is what happens with a lot of mausoleums to this day. When they know that they're going to where they want to build a mausoleum, they will pre-sell spaces. When they have enough money, they'll actually start the construction. So page number 1 here, you can see Mary Johnson purchased the first crypt, the first 2 crypts, April 27th of 1910, $125 each, which is about $3,500 now total. So, and if we go back to the slide where they said that this was affordable for people, there were probably not a lot of people who could have afforded $125 in 1910. Otto Mueller purchased 4 crypts in 1910 for $500. So he was $125 each. He chose to split his into 4 payments over a little bit more than a year. Caspar Fenhaus was a Civil War veteran. He purchased 2 crypts for $250. So these all would have been pre-purchases. And this is perhaps my favorite crypt face in the whole mausoleum. You'll see at the bottom it says we're all in this together. And it has always intrigued me, and every time I did a tour of the mausoleum I would talk about this. And I just loved this. I loved what it represented, but I didn't know anything about what was going on here. And my friend newspapers.com helped me figure out that Mary Genevieve died shortly after she was born in 1921, and her father, Thorpe Edmonds, purchased this crypt, and little Mary Genevieve was placed in here. In 1992, 3 additional family members joined her, and that would be her uncle Hobart, his wife Ellen, and their daughter Genevieve, who likely was named after little Mary Genevieve, who had died. All 3 of them were placed here after Ellen died in 1992. So it's like a little family house here. So it's a great story. In addition to the individual crypts, where one casket slides into a crypt in the wall, there are also 5 family tombs. That's what they called them. This is one of them for Hermann Fleeth. His name is above the door. He was one of the mausoleum promoters, and he and his son Walter went together and bought one of the 5 10-crypt family tombs for $2,650, which would be about $75,000 today. So you can see in these rooms, each one of these ledges is a body. So there's 5 on each side. And this is another page from the original ledger book. This page is titled Tombs, and this is where they kept track of everyone who purchased something. In the first 2 months, they had already sold 45 crypts and 3 of the family tombs, which amounted to about 20% of the total spaces, which I think is pretty darn good for 2 months trying to sell something nobody knows anything about. Amounted to $13,575 in sales, which is about $375,000. And then each sale of the crypt space was documented with a deed that conveyed the use of that crypt to the owner. So the mausoleum is owned by the Mausoleum Association, and when you buy a space, what you're buying is the right to be interred there when you're dead. You do not own the actual space. You're just owning the privilege of being able to lay there in perpetuity. So one side of the deed is the actual deed, and I have this up here if you want to look at it later. On the back was a map of the mausoleum. So this is a flattened map, and they would put X's in the spaces that you bought. So you would be able to go into the mausoleum and know exactly where your future resting spot would be. In June of 1911, more than a year after the project was announced, they finally started construction. A contractor from Ohio, of all places, the home of the community mausoleum, came up on a train, and he brought with him equipment and some supplies that would be needed to start the construction. They expected the building to be completed by February of the following year, but that did not happen. I don't know why they missed the date, but for whatever reason, was not finished at the anticipated date. This page from the ledger book, which is titled F.H. Sievert, and if you recall, he is the gentleman who oversaw the construction, lists money that was paid to him. In 1912, almost $9,000 in payments were made to the marble company alone. The entire inside is marble. Almost a year later, now we're into May of 1912, they thought they would be finished in February. Craftsmen were finally finishing the interior. This is from the Wausau Daily Herald, soon to be finished. Work is progressing on the mausoleum. The work of placing the marble ledges and slabs is now nearing completion. A number of expert and highly skilled men are engaged in the same. They also note in this same article that this was a massive and imposing architectural effort and is the, quote, largest building of its kind in the state. If you remember before, it was the first of its kind. And what happened is, because of their delay, a mausoleum that was being built in Milwaukee beat them to the grand opening. So the Milwaukee Mausoleum becomes the first in this community mausoleum in the state, but the one in Wausau becomes the largest, and the first in Wausau. 5 months later, October of 1912, the mausoleum was dedicated. This is a photo from the newspaper showing the newly constructed mausoleum. It looks a little different than now. If you've been out there, there are no trees around it, just a couple burials, really nothing much going on but the mausoleum. The newspaper reported that it was a cold and rainy day, but 500 people attended the dedication, which seems to be a lot of people. Listening to speakers talk about the benefits of community mausoleums as the sanitary option that was affordable to most families, which again really is a questionable statement. And here's the building a few years later. They've planted some trees. There's some viney things growing up onto the building. You can see what at the time there were beautiful stained glass windows on either side of the entrance. There were also in the back and in several other places. It is a great example of Egyptian Revival mausoleum architecture. The double front doors are indeed brass. They are very heavy. The threshold below is granite. And notice the fantastic Egyptian Revival style in it. You've got kind of the pyramids going up and the winged orbs above at the top of the doors and at the pediment above the doorway. And this is a close-up of the two of those. The top one is above the main entrance. The bottom one is above the door that's on the north side of the building. So this is the floor plan of the mausoleum. It's a little bit easier to comprehend than what's on the back of the deed. So this is a straight shot looking down. Directly inside, well, first, they had a porte cochere, which actually would be It's a place where you can pull a carriage through and unload the body. Later on, they called it the porch. Inside is the chapel. It's not a really big space, but adequate if it was raining outside and you wanted to do a small service inside the mausoleum. And then the 5 stars indicate where the 5 family tombs are. So there were 3 on the outside walls and then 2 that were in the middle. And kind of the nice thing about this is there's a long hallway on the north side, a long hallway on the south side, and it really allowed people to walk around the block. So if you wanted to just kind of stroll around the mausoleum, if it was a rainy day, you'd be able to do that. And now we're just going to do a couple pictures of what it actually looks like inside. This is just inside the main office. These are modern pictures within the last 20 years. You can see the white marble on the walls and the black and white mosaic tile on the floor, both of which were mentioned in the articles describing what it was going to be like. And you can see one of the family tombs right here. To the left is the north corridor. And you can see here, kind of has a yellowish cast, and that's because there is light shining in some stained glass windows that are up in the back. And these are the ledges. When I was reading again about the description of what it was like inside, people were installing the ledges, and that was ledges in front of every crypt, and that was to allow for flowers to be placed. To the right side of the main entrance is the south corridor. Pretty much looks the same. And again, there are 5 family tombs, and they each have 10 crypts. The 3 rooms on the outside originally had stained glass windows, which were removed decades ago because they were repeatedly vandalized and broken. This is Fleeth again. There are family rooms for the Deutsch and Fleeth families, for the Jones family, Curtis family, and the Hullab family. The Deutsch family tomb is located on the inside block, so of course there aren't outside stained glass windows, but there were originally stained glass panels in the roof that allowed light to come in that way. But again, lots of issues with having a window in your roof. And it was cemented over in the 1960s because they repeatedly leaked. And that makes these 2 family tombs very dark because there's no interior lighting. These are 3 of the original wicker chairs that are in the chapel area, the front chapel area. I don't know if the table is original. It doesn't seem to match the chairs, but I just like that they still have some of the original furniture. And then as we go outside, this is the back of the mausoleum. It has kind of a funky shape when you're on the outside. So it kind of makes you wonder what's on the inside. So having seen the pictures, you now know why it looks the way it does. The back windows were originally stained glass, just like the front ones originally were, but they were also removed and were replaced with thick plastic. And maybe 15 years ago, they put what I consider some unsightly white vents inside of that. This is the south side of the mausoleum. So this really gets you a good view of what they call the porch, or the porte cochere, which is this. And you can see the course of red granite that runs down, the blocks that run down the whole bottom. This would have been originally one of the stained glass windows in the Fleeth family tomb. And notice the 4 small windows in the roof line way back here. These 4. There are similar windows on the other side. That's what they look like from the outside. They look pretty neat. I think they're covered with something to protect them from being broken. Here's what they look like on the inside. There they are. And here's what they look like when the sun shines through them. So that's what's creating that beautiful yellow glow that's in some of the pictures. Advertisements for the sales of the crypts continued to appear in the newspaper. They kind of look like they're newspaper articles, but they're actually paid advertisements. Trying to be conversational, I think. This says in 1913 that almost all of the crypts had been sold and that prices would increase soon, so buy now. This 1914 ad invites potential buyers to visit before the prices increase again. And also from 1914, and I only included this because I love that it says that anyone interested in the cryptic mode of burial is invited. And they actually had, especially leading up to the groundbreaking and even while they were doing the construction, they had somebody, a salesperson at the mausoleum, just in case somebody dropped by and wanted to learn more about it. One of the things that is repeatedly mentioned in the news articles and the ads is that the building will last forever. And here's just a couple mentions. 1910, building to be imperishable. 1912, the Vermont marble exterior is held in place by a new process which ensures absolute permanency. In 1912, in the address that J.L. Sturtevant gave at the opening, an ample maintenance, this permanent structure with a permanent organization in back of it, an ample maintenance fund has been provided, and this mausoleum, built for all time, will have the same tender care as it has today. I think we all know that it's kind of impossible for any building to last forever, and that will eventually be problematic. So over the years, the prices of single crypts did steadily increase, as they said it would happen in the newspaper advertisements. These are prices from the ledger, so they started out at the pre-sale price of $125. After the mausoleum was open, it went up to $175, and then it steadily goes up until 1931. They're selling for $350 per crypt. The family tombs, the pre-sale price was $26.50. I'm going to assume they had a little trouble selling them because the price has dropped. And the only people who paid full price were the promoters. So the price dropped a little bit. The fifth one actually did sell, I think, in 1913 or 14, but was resold again in 1930 to the Hullab family, who are the ones who eventually did occupy that family tomb. So $5, yes, $5 from the sale of each crypt was put into the perpetual care fund. And that was to establish an endowment of $1,750. And it was the income from that is what they were sure was going to cover all of their expenses. And that would be for providing perpetual care, ongoing maintenance, and making any repairs to the building. The reality of it was that the perpetual care fund and the interest from that endowment was nowhere near enough to cover even the annual cost of keeping the place clean, let alone fixing anything. This was made worse when $600 of the fund was paid to Pine Grove Cemetery for them to do perpetual care of the grounds outside. So now their perpetual care fund is down to $1,150. And in 1945, they earned $33 in interest on that money. And that was the money that $33 is what was supposed to pay all of the bills. And the expenses far, far outweighed the income. And I believe the promoters were putting in their own money to keep the mausoleum cared for at that point. In 1929, only 17 years after the mausoleum opened, Herman Fleeth died after a 10-day bout with influenza. He, of course, was interred in the family crypt in the mausoleum. Fast forward to 1945, with only the $1,100 left in the endowment fund and having the need for major roof repairs, so this would have been 33 years after the mausoleum was built. The Mausoleum Association, which at this point is now Mr. Deutsch, is soliciting crypt donors and asking them to make voluntary contributions to shore up the perpetual care fund. The goal was to have $5,000 in the fund, which they believed the income from that would be enough to satisfy all future obligations of the mausoleum, which of course was not enough. At this point, Roman added several committee members to the Mausoleum Association to assist him. They were not owners of the mausoleum, but they were just basically people who were helping him manage the mausoleum. Just 7 years later, in 1952, Roman Deutsch dies. He is also interred in the family mausoleum. With him no longer managing the mausoleum, crypt owners were kind of left flailing. There was nobody to go to if you had to put somebody in. There was nobody to go to if the roof leaked. And some of them banded together, and they sought a legal remedy for them to be able to assume the Mausoleum Association, access the perpetual care fund, and start making repairs to the building. They had another campaign to solicit donations from crypt donors in 1954, and this time the goal was to raise $17,500 to fund repairs to the building. Over the next 50 years, there were at least 4 more campaigns to solicit donations from crypt donors and their descendants. And this became much more problematic because many of the crypt donors were dead, and their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren were scattered across the country. They tried very hard to keep track of where everyone's children and grandchildren were so they could send them letters asking for money, but it just became increasingly difficult. And there were major repairs that had to be made. The roof has had ongoing issues. At one point, a crack developed in the pediment over the porch. It went straight up, and they had to add a steel reinforcing beam to stop it from collapsing. And there were also many incidences of vandalism over the entire history of the building. In the early years, it was a lot of teenage boys with a gun shooting out windows in the mausoleum. But later on, it became pretty significant vandalism with people breaking into the building, damaging the doors, breaking the stained glass windows, which at some point were turned into the plastic or plexiglass. In 1988, during a break-in, someone pried one of the crypt faces off and it fell to the floor and broke. And this is the mausoleum on a not so sunny day. It's actually a color picture, even though it looks black and white. And I know that because I can see this pink flower here. But it is just a wonderful picture of the interior of the building. It's raise your hand if you've been inside. Maybe a quarter of the people. It's cold, can be a little damp. But I just find it very fascinating to walk in, walk around, look at everybody. I say hello to everyone. So this is the South Corridor. As happens with a lot of organizations that are around for a long time, and it's been, 112 years since the mausoleum opened, they have had their share of financial struggles. They've had to raise money, but they have always found a way to keep the mausoleum going. I don't personally know the people who take care of the mausoleum at this point, but if there are things that need to be repaired, they seem to get done. And if you want to visit, you can't get inside. The building is locked. Families of the people who are interred there do have a key to get in, so they can visit their relatives whenever they'd like, but everyone can go and look around the outside. So for the part 1 of my program, the mausoleum, I'm going to leave you with what's one of my favorite pictures from the mausoleum. And this is the massive handle that's on the front door. So this is showing you 112 years of wear of families and visitors going into the mausoleum. And I'll tell you, those doors are super heavy. And this is what the mausoleum looks like today. This is from a couple years ago. It really looks the same, except that the stained glass windows aren't there. And that, my friends, is the story of the mausoleum. And I am, Cheryl, do you want me to go right into the cemetery? Okay, into the slides? Okay, so part 2, in anticipation of the cemetery tour, I'm just gonna talk a little bit about headstone monument symbolism in the cemetery. Most of these slides our pictures are from Pine Grove. Victorians were notorious for doing and overdoing everything. And that, in addition to their daily life, passed on to death. And they overdid everything associated with death. They were very big into symbolism, and that also carried over to headstones. So there's going to be a number of concepts, symbolism concepts, that you're going to see a lot of in the cemetery here. We see a lot of what's called the Book of Life, which you can see on the top here. Sometimes it's open, as this one is. This one is actually engraved with events from this person's life. Sometimes the book is closed, which could indicate that that person's life is over. Sometimes, if they're young, only a couple pages will be open. If they're really old, most of the pages will be open. So symbolism, it's always open to interpretation. It could also just be somebody liked books. The hand is also very popular in our area. And one of the reasons for this is because unless you were wealthy, you were at the mercy of the monument company with what they stocked. So monument companies here seem to have stocked a lot of hands and books and drapery. So this monument has fallen over, it's laying in the ground, but you'll see that there's a hand coming down, which would represent the hand of God coming down for the person. And there is a 3-link chain that's being held onto, and one of those chains is broken, which is symbolic of the dead person being the broken link in the family chain. Here's the hand going up, which is presumably the direction you want to be going when you're dead. Sometimes hands are clasped. This can indicate a husband and wife if they are buried together. This one most likely indicates the hand of God taking the hand of the deceased to heaven. Drapery is also very common. Drapery was intended to kind of evoke feelings of the dead person for the comforts of home. This is actually carved right into the marble. Here's another very tall obelisk, and you'll see that there's drapery coming over. There's tassels at the end of it. This is an urn, and the urn has a shorter piece of drapery on it. There's a lot of urns also, which are symbolic that the remains of the deceased are buried in this location. And there's lots of versions of logs and trees and things like that. The Callan family has a family plot, and I'm going to say that there are maybe 8 or 9 monuments that all look like this for different members of the family. So I don't know if they had something to do with logging, lumbering, whatever, but it's just very fun to find them all in one spot. This is referred to as the Tree of Life. There are lots of variations of the Tree of Life. This one is exceptionally beautiful. It's carved out of stone, actually looks like the bark of a tree. There is some ferns, thank you, ferns at the bottom. There is a scroll that hangs on the front, and this is for a family. This is for the Reiner family. There's nothing written on the scroll. Here it says, "Dying is but going home." And you'll notice that there is a rope carved out of the rock. It's also missing a piece, which, just like the chain, is indicative of that gap is the deceased person who's missing. This is a Tree of Life for a child. This is short. I'm going to say it's maybe 18 inches tall, maybe 2 feet. It has the cherub on the front. There are many roses, which are both things that were very representative of innocence and a very young child having died. This is probably the shortest tree of life I've ever seen. It's maybe a foot tall. And the interesting thing about this is for a baby that died very young. At the bottom of the tree of life, which is cut very short, this child's life was very short, there is a dead dove. I've seen many doves on monuments. I have never seen a dead dove. And of course, before advances in medicine, it was not uncommon to have multiple children in a family die at the same time if a diphtheria epidemic came through, or smallpox, or influenza, or really anything. So here is a double headstone for a family that lost 2 children. This family lost 3, and this family lost 4. And unfortunately, a vandal broke them all off, that's a whole nother story. Here's another child with an angel petting a lamb. So again, 2 of the probably most prolific symbols of childhood death. And I just threw this one in because I love it. There's maybe 4 of these right inside the entrance. I have always referred to these as the bathtubs because they're about the size of a bathtub. If you took the stones out, they kind of look like a bathtub, but I think they're actually planters. But as long as I have ever visited, they've been filled with white rocks. And there are also some cultural significance to the symbolism on stones. It is a Polish tradition to have personalized pictures on headstones. So I think this one has one on each side for the husband and the wife. So this is in St. Michael's Cemetery, which was the Polish Catholic Church. If you go out into Polish cemeteries further out into the county, you'll see a lot of them. But it's also something that appears on a lot of Hmong headstones. So same thing, personalized pictures. I was in the cemetery maybe a month ago, towards the back, way in the back, and there is a largish section that has a lot of Hmong burials, and a lot of them have these personalized pictures. They have just some fantastic monuments to their relatives who are deceased. If you encourage you to go look at that. And then we had a gap from like the 1920s to the 90s, 1990, where headstones got kind of blah. And then with advances in what monument companies could do with personalizing headstones, the whole thing of personalizing your headstone came back. And there was a lot of significance in some of them. So this is a great personalized monument for Clifford Traeger. He was alive when I took this picture. He has since died. He was a retired engineer with the US Marines, so his headstone is engraved with a ship, an engine order telegraph on the right, and above that it says securely tied off and finished with engines, which I think is a great parallel to death. And Kathleen Fail, I think it's pretty clear she loved pink flamingos. They are on her headstone. For many years, there was a pink flamingo planted in the ground next to her. I don't know if there's somebody still doing that. And this is one that has some religious significance, I'm sure, to the Himmel family. And this one is unusual because this is homemade. It is the only one I've ever seen. It is basically a slab of wood cut off of a piece of tree. There is a piece of leather. This dark brown is a piece of leather that is burned in with the deceased name and birth date. And this is a piece of heavy cardboard that had some kind of handwritten message on it that I was never able to decipher. I believe this whole thing is now not here anymore, that it's just deteriorated over time and is gone.
Is it in pine?
Yes. And this is an above ground family tomb, much like a regular mausoleum, but this is just one you buy for yourself, and it's a side by side. And there are also a number of family mausoleums within Pine Grove. I think this is the Ross family mausoleum, and I just happened to catch it on a day when the sun hit it. So it made a great picture. If you are ever in the cemetery, always go, in any cemetery, always go to the family mausoleums. If there is a window in the front, and look inside. There are fantastic stained glass windows, in most of them in Pine Grove. This is the D.C. Everest Mausoleum in Wausau. It is on a very large lot. And the story that I had been told to me was that Mr. and Mrs. Everest had I think it was a son who had died when he was young, and he was buried in the ground, and it bothered Mrs. Everest so much at the thought of her little baby being in the cold, wet ground that Mr. Everest had a mausoleum built so that they could move their son there and he could be above ground. They also have a very nice window in their mausoleum. And these are two things you can't ever see again because they're gone. And I'm very glad that I captured pictures of them. This is the chapel that was in the middle of Pine Grove. I have not been able to find out anything about it. I have never encountered anyone who remembered being in it for a service. It's just a small chapel. By the time I saw it, the cemetery was using it solely to store chopped up wood that they would use when they burned fires, to thaw the ground to bury people. And it was like well on its way to totally falling down by the time I took this picture. There were holes in the roof. I'm going to assume it was just the cutest little chapel at some point, and I wish I knew more about it. And this is the repository. And this was just a cement building that was used to store bodies over the winter when it was, if you didn't want to pay what was probably a significant amount of money for them to thaw the ground in the winter. On the inside, there were basically shelves. It was almost like a mausoleum inside. There were numbered shelves inside. After your funeral service was done, the funeral home would bring your casket here. They would put you on your assigned shelf. And then in the spring, when the ground was thawed and they could start digging, they would dig and they would pull you out and put you in the ground. So 2 buildings that are no longer there. And that is the end.